The Atlantis theory, possibly one of the most controversial pieces of history ever found. Throughout this documentary, we will be looking over the evidence that has been found and at a potential location that has been suspected by many, Santorini. But to find a conclusive answer, we must go back to where the Atlantis theory was first mentioned, Plato's dialogues.
In this circumstance, Plato is our only source of evidence that we have to work with, because he was closest to the time of Atlantis. In our opinion, we think his dialogues are trustworthy enough to believe. As we said before, these dialogues and this theory are very controversial, but we are still in a strong position to believe Plato. Now on to Plato's dialogues. He has many descriptions about Atlantis, some about its location and how it looked. One of his main descriptions about Atlantis' location was he said that it was larger than Asia and Libya combined, and the word he used for larger than was meson, and the word he used for in between was meson. So there is two different sides we can take, which we'll get to later. Also in his dialogues, he says many things about Atlantis being very luxurious and wealthy. This linked to them having hot and cold water plumbing, which was very luxurious for back then. He also said Atlantis had divine nature, and things like these can help us find out if Santorini could have been Atlantis. Aristotle was known as Plato's student. It is apparent that there was falling out between the two, which makes us wonder what happened to them and why Aristotle was so biased against Plato. Also how he thought Atlantis never existed, and why he was always so strong for his point and was extremely biased against Plato.
Santorini, or originally Thera, is a Greek island in the southern Aegean Sea, about 200 kilometres southeast of Greece's mainland. Santorini, as mentioned earlier, is one of the biggest suspects in the search for the island of Atlantis. There are many reasons why Santorini is connected to Atlantis. One of the main similarities between Atlantis and Santorini is the description of the island. There are many descriptions of Atlantis, as mentioned earlier, that match up perfectly to descriptions of Santorini, which we will get to later on. In these two frescoes, we have been shown many links between Atlantis and Santorini that we have spotted. Some of these links were in the large mountains in the fresco, which Atlantis does have. Plato says this in his descriptions. Another link is the beautiful divine nature, including the wonderful trees, rivers and lakes. There is also a big harbour, which links to Santorini because it is an island and is surrounded by water.
So the big question, where was Atlantis? The evidence we have been given is that Atlantis was larger than Asia and Libya combined, but it happens to be that meson, which means greater than, and meson, which means between, both sound incredibly similar. Then conveniently, Santorini is pretty much smack bang in between Asia and Libya. Also, if it was bigger than Asia and Libya, it would have been massive and pretty hard to sink by a volcano. So therefore, we think that Plato was saying in between. But on the flip side, some say back then they didn't know how big Asia and Libya were. So it is always possible that it was bigger than Asia and Libya combined of what they knew.
Speaking of where Atlantis is, there is another clue we have been given. Destroying Atlantis, there would have had to have been lots of earthquakes to erupt, the massive volcano that destroyed Atlantis. Conveniently, Santorini is actually in between the Eurasian and African tectonic plates. These plates will then cause friction, which creates earthquakes. In my opinion, lots of these gradual earthquakes would cause a massive volcano to erupt that destroyed Atlantis. So this gives us more evidence that Santorini can be Atlantis. But on the other hand, there may be other places in the world that are in earthquake hotspots doing the same thing.
One concern we do have about the location is the shape of Santorini. In Plato's descriptions, he describes the shape of Atlantis as oblong, but Santorini is circular. This is a problem we have, but we are not sure if he had made a mistake or something like that. But we have picked up something, another possible solution for the location of Atlantis, which is Crete. Crete is a part of Greece and is just south of Santorini, and its shape is oblong, like Plato's descriptions. But we have stronger evidence that Santorini can be Atlantis.
There has been lots of talk about the volcano that erupted and what has dispersed from the volcano. Causing Atlantis to sink, there was a volcano that erupted. So if you don't know what a pyroclastic flow is, it is a volcano that is very hot and destructive. This creates the lava to flow at a great speed. I think this matches incredibly well with how Atlantis would have sunk, like with the lava flowing very quickly that is very destructive, which would have meant it would be more likely to have eroded Atlantis. Then, according to the documentary, the geologists went on a search for these remains. Believe it or not, they found the remains of a pyroclastic flow volcano, which could have been from this volcano. Looking at the other side though, because Santorini is in between the two tectonic plates, it is a volcano and earthquake hotspot, so there may have been other volcanoes that left these remains.
Plato described Santorini as one that was extremely ahead of its time, with many luxurious items that cities all around the world wouldn't have dreamed of. One of these that was incredibly evident is the hot and cold water plumbing. I've mentioned this because for its time, this was extremely high tech. When digging at Santorini, hundreds of smaller drains that led to one major sewage system were found. Although this isn't necessarily a plumbing system, these drains are extremely ahead of their time, and maybe this sewer system was what Plato was talking about.
Another great link between Santorini and the descriptions is the rocks. In Plato's dialogue, he talks about the red, white and black rocks. Although this is quite a vague description, on Santorini there are many cases where different types of igneous, sedimentary and metamorphic rocks were found. Just looking at Santorini, you can see the white sedimentary rocks that are all over the cliffs. This is important because as well as sedimentary, large amount of igneous rocks were found. This obviously means that there was an extremely large volcano that erupted.
Another example of different rock formations on Santorini is the big layer of the igneous rock pumice. Geologists have found a very big layer of pumice rock which was a massive 1 meter thick. Pumice is an igneous rock, which means it was formed by a volcano. Because this layer of pumice is so thick, it would have been created by lots and lots of lava flow that dried to create this. This massive volcano could have been the one that destroyed Atlantis.
It was said that the volcano that destroyed Atlantis erupted around 9,000 years before Plato. If it was truly 9,000 years before, it would be completely unrealistic being so long before. But in ancient Greek, they wrote 9,000 as 900 with an apostrophe, so that means they could have easily mistaken 900 as 9,000. If that truly meant 900 and Solon lived around the year 600, it would have put it smack bang around the time the volcano in Santorini went off.
So in conclusion, Plato's Dialogues, a trustworthy source, has given us lots of evidence to deal with. We've now dealt with this evidence and have come to a conclusion that there is a few mistakes, but overall there is more strong evidence supporting that Santorini can be Atlantis.